Hi friends, Max Helash here. On this episode of the Corpus Animus podcast, I have training think tank coaches Brandon Dorman and Kyle Ruth on. We talk about a whole host of things, all CrossFit. We dive into data. We get completely off topic, but there are so many things that you can learn in this hodgepodge episode of stuff. If you're on the go and you want to listen to just the audio version, subscribe to the Corpus Animus podcast on your favorite podcast app. Get better at the sport of CrossFit alongside some of the best athletes in the world in our online training program, The Design. Head over to our website, trainingthinktank.com/DSGN to learn more.
Well, before we get going, Max, what are we talking about today and who do we have with us?
Yeah, we got Training Think Tank coach Brandon Dorman. He is the second fittest coach at Training Think Tank behind me.
I was going to say, I'm pretty sure that I might, from open scores, I think I might take that case.
He's probably the most humble. So we're going to talk about a concept he always refers to, separation value. And if you watch the throwdowns, he refers to that a lot when people are breaking down workouts and looking at workouts. Basically, how do you maximize your training potential in a game day scenario? So,
Kyle, how's he doing microphone-wise?
Max, make sure you're facing the microphone when you're talking.
It looks terrible.
Sorry.
Act like you've done this.
I'm so nervous because I have to be close.
It's like our 12th or 13th time and he still can't use a microphone.
Yeah. I did that on purpose to illustrate the separation value concept.
All right.
Let's go, Brandon. Tell him something.
Well, I'm really nervous about being too close or too far away now that I think about it.
You'll get yelled at. Just
separation value of 1 inch here.
Yeah,
That's
separation value of 1 inch from mouth to microphone.
Yes. So I think what you guys have done a really good job on, especially now in the classroom, is you're going through that limiter bridge performance model and really kind of talking about how you bridge that gap. Yes, be close to the microphone, and talking about what you can do is in regards to performance training. And I think that when we're talking about separation value, what we're doing is kind of adding a tie-in to the performance training model that we already have. And so, in other words, like when I'm looking at the sport, mostly it's for time, or as many reps as possible in a time domain, right? And so when we look at that, well, how do we get better? How do we get faster at something? It's either movement speed, which I think is the king of the sport now. You see all of these guys and girls and how fast they move.
I thought I was the king of the sport.
You are.
Can we just turn, hang on, can we turn Max's microphone off for this podcast?
So I think that's one of the things that we have to start thinking about. But then the other thing is rest time. And I know that that's super simple and everybody says duh, but we don't really think about how long we're resting. And so it's about reducing that rest time to as few seconds as possible throughout a for time workout, or obviously throughout an AMRAP setting. And so
I'm going to cut you off there for a second, Brandon. If you ask most athletes before a workout, like, how are you going to approach this? What they're going to tell you is they're going to tell you what they're going to do, right? They're not going to tell you what they're not going to do. And what I mean by that is you say, how are you going to approach this workout? Oh, I'm going to go 5, 3, 1 on the bar muscle ups, and then I'm going to hold this pace. What they're not going to tell you is that I want to only rest 5 seconds between each of these sets of bar muscle ups. What they're going to just focus on is how they're going to chunk the work and not how much rest they're going to be taking, which, as you're pointing out, that's probably as important, if not more important, than the chunks of work that they're actually doing.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter how big of a set you're doing or how small of a set if the rest times get elongated in a workout, right? And so like I always give the example, if you're just doing 10 reps for time and I said, I'm going to do 10 unbroken, then yes, obviously that's the fastest way. But for most of us, especially Max just did a 15-minute AMRAP, which you guys will see in the future throwdown video. But if he did 10 unbroken thrusters every single time, then at some point he's probably going to blow up, right? And so he has to come up with a strategy that says, I'm going to break at some point, right? But when he starts breaking, he needs to come up with a game plan of how long can I let my rest breaks go where I can still do fast sets. And so if I'm doing 10 reps for time and I do 5 and 5 with a 5-second break each time, that allows me to keep 5-second breaks throughout the workout. And then I review my video at the end and say, that was 1 minute and 20 seconds of total rest time. And then the next time I do the workout, I say, this time I want to go unbroken. So I do 10 every single time in a 10-round workout, but I'm taking 25-second breaks to do those 10 reps. And my total rest time, whatever that math is 3 minutes and 45 seconds. Obviously, I went unbroken on each of those rounds, but the reality is that I took 2 more minutes of rest time because of what the pacing model that I set out for myself. So the first thing that I'm looking at is, hey, how can we maximize your current potential by coming up with a pacing model that works or fits within what you can do well.
And when you're doing that, you're focusing more on the rest time, is managing rest breaks versus how big of a chunk of work can you do here. So it's basically like flipping the way most people think about pacing structures. Most people think about the work and not the rest. And so what you're saying is one of the best ways to maximize your potential right now in an event is to focus on the rest and not focus on the chunks of work.
So if somebody is going to approach a new workout, right? Like it's an open workout gets released, they see a demo go, the demo is somebody that's super high level and they want to improve their ability to approach that workout on the first time. They've never done it. They've never seen that specific workout. They might not understand themselves at like the highest level yet. They don't know, can I do 15 unbroken or 10 unbroken or 20 unbroken? They just don't have that frame of reference yet. How would you go about that initial process of giving them an initial strategy before they could go through a video review?
For sure. I think this is probably one of the greatest values that we add as coaches, because we can help them do that in the training process. So that's why I say it goes kind of hand in hand with both the kind of limiter model. We're working through those things. And then as we bridge that gap into performance, we should be thinking about those things with our athletes all year round. It doesn't mean that we're just doing hard performance training all year round, but we are saying, hey, we're doing these EMOMs and I want you to hit this many burpees per minute because this is the average that I want you to be able to hit in an open style workout. Or we're going to do sets of 3 on muscle ups and then take this long of a break because this is the way we're going to attack that style of workout when we get there. And so as a coach, we can kind of give them those models in their head and teach them these are good pacing models for you at this moment, right? But over time, that's going to obviously change as someone gets better. So Travis's pacing models are going to be different than mine. Or
Travis doesn't have pacing models.
No, that he does not. And this is something that you haven't seen, I think, at the top of the sport. Everyone just goes fast and unbroken for the most part.
Well, Noah actually sits down and maps out like his whole workout. So I think there's different approaches that the elites have, but I think at some point there's going to be like the same way you would see a mile runner kind of knows their split times after every 400. I think you're going to start to see that with CrossFitters, that they develop the ability to look at a workout and understand how to break it up and how much rest they need. Like I know for myself, I'm a middle of the road competitive CrossFitter. And I know like, okay, in these types of movements, I need 20 seconds of rest. In these types of movements, 10 seconds of rest. And then if I'm blown up, then I'm just surviving. So I think as you refine yourself and do more competing, you probably will be able to develop some sort of an intuitive understanding of what those rest segments need to be in a workout.
For sure.
The other place, Brandon, you just touched on this, that even at the top level, what the athletes are now doing is going unbroken and fast. But you just touched on this, right? You know what speed someone's burpee, what pace per minute their burpees need to be, for example. So even for high level competitors who are doing just say everything unbroken in every workout, it's not the case. But, you know, if you look at the open, the majority of them are done that way. You can start to coach people to be like, all right, you know that you need to be in the top 20 in the world in 20.1 on the burpees. You need to be holding 20 burpees per minute as a male. Like that's that's the baseline to be in the top 20 in the world. So now we have a specific pace that we can target, and we can say in training, when you're doing burpees, you're always going to hold 21 burpees per minute. Cause well, let's face it, you don't want to just be in the top 20, right? But
it's going to get faster.
It gives you a different perspective. Like, so you mentioned, you know, limiter training and bridge training. Like to me, limiter training is like, okay, we're going to do heart rate intervals because we're trying to improve cardiac output, or, you know, decrease your heart rate at a specific pace or something like that. But then what you're talking about is performance training, is taking the variables of the sport, doing an analysis of the sport and breaking that down and focusing on those variables in training. That would fall under that performance training category.
For sure. I think we can go back to limiter training in the way that I would visualize that, as far as still giving people, because if it is heart rate intervals, you can still say, these are the things that we want to do within this heart rate zone. And it needs to feel like this when you're doing burpees. It needs to feel like this when you're doing air squats versus thrusters and so on and so forth. But as far as performance training goes, the way that we do that is we've built out all these models for the kind of the data that is the sport. So we know of all the movements that have been tested in the open, all the movements, what we called regionals back in the day, maybe that'll come back. And then last year's sanctionals, we have all the sanctional movements, and then we've been able to break those down, and games movements too. But we don't use those as much, obviously, because most people aren't making the games. But we can look at all those movements and say, how many reps are the top males, females, top 500, top 10,000? We've extrapolated that all the way to, I think, 15,000 now. And then also how many reps per minute in certain time domains. And so then based on that data, we can take that. That's objective data that we know this is all the people that finished in the top 15,000. This is their average, right? this is how much we have to do over the course of that performance training that we're doing to be able to hit these segment or targets that we want.
Do you have any specifics? Like if somebody's trying to get into the sport and they want to be, they know like thrusters is a common movement that then you need to get better at in the sport of CrossFit. How many reps per minute? Is there any context to the data that you have? Like just give people some sort of a...
I want to be a little secretive with the specialized data
don't
that
give
we
it all
have.
away.
Yeah, but I'll give it just based off of this. So Max, fix your mic.
I'm all over the place, man.
How am I doing?
You're
Average?
doing great. Brandon, you are doing great. I wish I could press that button that has the little wind chimes.
I know, I
right?
need that right now.
Brandon, you're doing fantastic.
So if we just looked at the very basics of how much volume should they be able to do in an open workout, the top 20 are averaging 93 thrusters in any given open workout. So if we took all, and this is obviously the most simplified version of the data, because I don't want to dive into like...
not only that, an average doesn't capture anywhere near the peak, right? It's way higher than that in some workouts.
For sure. So the average of the top 20 males and females is 93 thrusters in the workout. And a lot of that is just like, look, sometimes 84 thrusters for time is the workout, like 21, 18, 15. So, but just so people can kind of understand, that's probably the max volume that you're going to have to be able to do, right? Then 82 for the top 500 and then 71 for the top 10,000, right? So that's kind of just giving you an overview of the numbers that you hit. And then from there, as coaches, what we've done, and this is kind of, you'd have to be a part of Training Think Tank, I think, to open that door, is then we've taken that to the different time domains that have been tested. We've taken that to different variations of thrusters, what the combos are, how many are you doing in 1 minute versus upper body pulling in another minute. And then we can kind of basically take all of that and reverse engineer it into a performance training model that we use.
So for somebody that's just building their own training or just doing their own training, that would be the practical application of that is knowing, if you are doing limiter training, how to prepare for a certain amount of volume so that if you're doing a workout, you don't get crushed.
Right.
And then B, gives you some sort of an ability to look at a workout ahead of time and be like, all right, if I want to finish here, this is approximately based on the past where people are going to be able to finish, how many reps they're going to be able to go. And it kind of gives you a more intelligent jump off point to your strategy process.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too that we can do with all this data is not only the volume that's tested, but the movements that are tested. So if you're just an open athlete, then you can do this yourself. Like anybody can go and get the data. Like this is all, it's free for anybody to go and grab. Look at how often thrusters have been tested in the open. How often have burpees been tested in the open? What are the variations of burpees versus the variations of, is it chest to bar, or is it pull up, or box jump overs versus burpee box jumps? And start looking at those things. And then we can say, what are the things that are most important or come up the most so that we know that we're training those the adequate amount of time.
So Brandon, you just gave us an example. Was it 94 thrusters? Is that right? So how would you use that to inform someone's training, say, early season, mid season, late season? So that way, like I need to get a better understanding of how you take this data and actually integrate it into your coaching.
Yeah. Again, the most simplest way would be if I took somebody on and they were already, let's say, well-trained, right? They had good movement patterns. Cause to me, again, I think movement speed is king with a high level athlete, especially, right? So the first thing that I would look at is movement economy. Like, can they move well and can they move efficiently in this, thruster, let's say. Yeah. After we do that, then let's say, checks all the boxes, he's totally fine, she's totally fine. Then we want to build up the volume to that number in the time domains that have been tested. So not to dive deep into the time domains, but we know in the open, let's say that's what they're prepping for. We know, top guys in the sport are hitting 93 thrusters in a certain time, which we know, but you can go
let's
look
say
that
10
up.
minutes.
Yeah, I was just going to say, let's use 10 minutes arbitrarily.
10 minutes, which is actually much less than that, just so people know. It's insane how fast they're moving.
Very arbitrarily.
Yeah. But if it is 10 minutes, then we'll build the volume up first. So we just need to be able to do 90, 100 thrusters. Usually I'll overreach them by about 15 to 20%. So they're maybe doing 115 thrusters at a certain speed though, but there's full rest in between. And then we'll build some density or intensity into that. So maybe now it's going to 15 minutes at a certain speed, but now the rest times are a little bit broken or shorter, right? And then over time, as we get closer to, let's say, the peaking time, or we're getting into the open prep, then we're going to build that into a model where now they're doing it in the time domain that's required in the sport. And then as we kind of turn the corner into true peak, what I would do is actually start testing that in the sport with the various combos that may be tested or have been tested in the past.
So would you use past open testers during that time? Would you create things that are unique for the athlete? How do you approach that last bit of the phase?
Yeah, so I know we all do this a little bit differently. The way that I now categorize everything is based on patterns. And so I will categorize into 4 major patterns, and then there's other things that kind of go like underneath that umbrella, so to speak. But the main things would be a flexion pattern, what is considered a squatting pattern. So all the squatting patterns are in one bucket, all the hinging patterns, so basically pulling anything off the ground. And there's a ton of variations right now. We have dumbbells, we have barbells, power snatch, hang power snatch, power clean, hang power clean, dumbbell devil's press, like all of those.
And that's just for the open. That doesn't even include sanctionals, regionals, games, which have like sandbag, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Blah,
so
blah,
I'm just thinking like open style athletes. I know that's where most people are focusing kind of their training season, right? And then we have upper body pulling gymnastics, or just upper body pulling in general, whatever you want to call that. And then upper body pressing, right? And then obviously there are many others, right? All the monostructural work and cyclical work that we do. And that's obviously a huge base building phase for us. So then from there, I can take those variations that we have and say, we know that most often thrusters are comboed with pull-ups. We've seen that, or burpees, right?
Yep.
But we need to make sure that they're still creating some variance in their training. So maybe it's a different squatting variation with pull-ups, a different squatting variation with ring muscle-ups, a different squatting variation with bar muscle-ups, a different squatting variation with ring row variations, right? You can create all this variance. And the nice thing too is that you can build those even into deload weeks. So maybe they're training really, really hard, but then we can still get those same patterns. Like it's maybe just an air squat with a ring row on a deload week, but they're still touching those patterns at a certain volume or intensity that you want.
At what stage of development does this become the most important thing? Because like if somebody can't do a thruster, or they're just learning how to do a thruster, we're not really that concerned about their ability to handle volume of a pattern that's not developed yet.
Yeah. See, I think that's why I always go back to movement being the first thing that we look at. And so when I talk about movement, I basically have stolen everything that you've done in the movement course. So yeah, thank you for all of that.
Which is in the classroom.
Yes. But I use all those philosophies, and part of that with movement is movement endurance. So in the way that I'm looking at it with someone that's, let's say, young or new to the sport, they just have to be able to do at least whatever the prerequisite volume is to get into the sport. So maybe that's just doing 30 thrusters in a session, but moving well while doing those.
Yeah.
The challenge that we have as coaches, and maybe this is a completely different podcast, is most of the people that I find that come to us, or in the past at least, have already been pretty beat up. Like people reach out to us because they know, like, hey, maybe they're a little bit more thoughtful with the way they do things, or whatever it may be that kind of draws people to the organization. Where I have a lot of people that have already had back surgeries, shoulder surgeries, knee surgeries, and then we're having to basically kind of retrain all of those patterns. So even with someone that is trained, kind of go to that question again, I still take those people through, we need to get you moving better before we're moving a lot, if that makes sense.
I think that's probably true for almost everybody that I've worked with, where the first thing that we can do, or the easiest thing to address, is almost always movement economy. That's the biggest quote unquote limiter to performance, right? So the biggest issue they've got is that they can't get into a good squat position in order to hold a barbell overhead in a good position, so they can't snatch well. Or, they don't have enough thoracic extension in their arch position of their muscle up, so they're not transitioning well from the swing into the transition, or something like that. There's always issues with the movements that we can address first, and that's always the lowest hanging fruit. It's the easiest thing to latch onto and address. But then after that, it does become more complex, and you have to have a better analysis of the sport in order to actually get people to improve. Yeah,
to stay on that vein just real quick, I think one of the things that people think about is I have to train hard to get to that, let's say 93 thrusters in 10 minutes, which really, again, close probably to 7 minutes or 6 minutes. The reality is,
don't give it all away, Brandon.
The reality is, though, is like, most people just won't ever get there unless they clean up the movement economy first. Because for me, when I squat and do that many, like I can grind it out. Like maybe just my fitness level, or I'm tough enough now, but I'm messed up afterwards, like the multiple knee surgeries and just bad positions. So for me, it's like I have to continue to refine my positions to be able to raise my ceiling to do it at that intensity that's required. Most of us jump into training and we just kind of take off, and we're reaching the volume that maybe we need, but then we're getting beat up. So again, I know this isn't necessarily part of what we've been talking about, but movement economy first, I think, is the prerequisite to all of the data points that we have.
I heard a quote, I think it was Tony Robbins recently, that said, most people overestimate what they can get accomplished in a week or a month, but underestimate what they can get accomplished in a year. And I think as you're talking, a lot of what I see is that if people would take a more long-term approach to their developmental process and then apply good analytical tools, that would allow them to achieve a higher overall fitness level and performance level than just trying to jump up to those volume targets. So go back to the beginning, refine your basics, work on your speed of development, then work on your volume of development, and then work on being able to put that together in a performance-based workout. And that comes with practice. So you can do it like with a throwdown every week, you can practice performance, or you have to wait on an annual cycle and do it every time like the open comes around.
Yeah. One of the things I always think about is other sports. And we've talked about this in another podcast when we're talking about the movement, just kind of like movement in general. But the reality is that every other sport is thinking about their technique way more than we do, I think, because it's just because maybe it is a training sport. We think about the technique with the Ollie lifts or with maybe the muscle ups or like the high skill gymnastics, but we're not thinking about, like, when I say technique, how do I breathe when I'm doing thrusters versus wall balls? It's almost the same pattern, but they're not, because one, you're releasing a ball, you're standing up overhead. What are you doing with your arms? What are you doing with your feet? What are you doing with your hips? And so when we start really diving in and refining those things, I think when we talk about separation value, that is what I mean by that's the foundation.
This is one of the things I've tried to capture in the classroom, is to get people that are in the classroom to think about the fact that a burpee, which is everyone thinks of as a simple movement, you drop yourself to the floor, you jump over the bar. I went through and did an analysis of the top 5-10 athletes from the open this past year in 20.1 and pulled out all the commonalities. And then when you do that and you look at someone else's burpees after having your eyes opened to what elite technique looks like, someone who can hold 20 or 21 or 22 burpees per minute, what that looks like, and you put it next to someone else, it's like, man, you might actually be as fit as some of these top athletes, from an underlying engine perspective, but your burpee economy is so bad that you can't hold the paces they're holding.
Yeah. Same
is true. Actually just did this in the Limiter Bridge Performance series in the classroom. I took the assault bike. Again, super simple. How many times have coaches ever sat down and tried to analyze the technique and the mechanics and the efficiency of someone on an assault bike at sport-specific RPMs or sport-specific paces? I went through and did that and found something that Max can correct, that Travis could correct, that Cedric could correct. Athletes that are, in all honesty, Max, you can say whatever you want to be about being mediocre. If you hit 200 calories on the assault bike in 10 minutes, like, that's way beyond mediocre. Yeah. But there's still things from a technical perspective, just a simple technique perspective, that can be improved. I think that what you just touched on, like, that's a huge area of performance that just isn't getting touched in our sport at all.
And that's what I think we're trying to bring to light. We are you talk about 200 calories on the assault bike for a male. That was like our fight for a long time. All the coaches in here were like grinding or pushing. And I'm going to be completely honest. I never thought about my technique. I thought about maybe how I was going to breathe and when I would lean forward, when I would lean back, just kind of little things like that. But I wasn't thinking about what's going on with my feet. How hard am I pressing from right side to left side? Am I pulling? Am I pressing? What am I doing with my hands? And all of those things matter when you're talking about performance.
Adjusting your seat, the seat height, how far forward, how far back, what's optimal mechanics for your limb length. All of those things are things that people can think about in every single movement in the sport. So that may be part of the reason that people struggle in general with thinking about the technical components of the sport, is because there are so many. It's hard to optimize all of them. But if you want to be the best in the world or one of the top athletes in the sport, turns out you're going to have to do that.
Yeah. As you said that, I was thinking the same thing. There's a lot of information. There's so many movements in the sport, so many combinations, so many things you have to work on, so many movements you need to be capable to do. How do we reduce this to something somebody's just getting in and they're really passionate about the concept? They love going into a workout and going as hard as they can. What are the most important data points from your perspective that they need to start looking at right off the bat? Like, what are some prerequisites that people need to, like, okay, this is you're 1 or 2 years into CrossFit, you love the sport. Where should I prioritize my time without the cop out of like, you should get a coach? Cause that probably would be the fastest way to go there.
Well, you should probably get a coach. No, I think that the way, if it's an open athlete, then the first thing they should do is just say, okay, what are the movements that are tested in the open? What are the most, outside of that then, what are the most common movements tested in the open? Okay, we know that these are the top 5. Then you can target, at least have some goals for, I want to get really good at burpees because they're tested every single year. I want to get really good at thrusters because they're tested every single year. I want to get really good at muscle ups. I don't have any, and so that's going to be a huge bottleneck when they come out. Chest to bar is going to be a huge bottleneck when they come out. Oh, now they have pistols coming out, so maybe that's something that is a skill program for me. So I would just do it as simple as that. Like, think less about, oh man, there are 28 movements been tested in the open, or there are hundreds of variations, and think more about these are the patterns. And that's why I kind of simplify everything down. And I'm not trying to be a reductionist when it comes to that stuff, but the sport, it is varied. Don't get me wrong, but it's way less varied than we think because the same things are tested over and over and over again. So there are patterns, just like anything. When we do statistics, we always find patterns. So with that said, then let's find the most simplified patterns and then come up with a game plan on how to attack those. So for someone, it would just be finding a good squatting position and then building endurance there, finding a good hinging position, building endurance there, getting your upper body gymnastics good enough to do the sport. And then after that, that's when you can start thinking about the volume and intensity and everything
So
else.
those would be the basics, the prerequisites is get all the movements done that you've seen in the competitions and just be able to do them. And then you can start to go through a more complex analytical process. So what would the next step be? Like, all right, now you've got all the movements. They might not be great, and it's a work in process. Like I've been doing CrossFit for a really long time, and 2 weeks ago or whenever reverse Jackie was 2 or 3 weeks ago as a throwdown workout, I literally changed my thruster position. And then I've just been working that new thruster position, which is, it's way different. My stance is wider. My feet are more angled out, but it feels more comfortable. It feels more natural. It feels like something that I could breathe in and be more consistent in. So I'm going to work it for a while. What's the next step after you have those requisite movements kind of at a base level of development?
Then I would pick targets for the open. So this kind of goes back to the goal setting podcast that you guys did. Maybe it's, I want to make top 10,000. And so then you can start going through the data. If you have a coach with us or one of us, then you can obviously just ask us for that, or do it yourself. Go through all the past open workouts and see what top 10,000, what those numbers are, what the reps per minute are, and all those things. And then you can kind of start targeting that. And obviously this kind of is, we're all talking about like maybe performance training right now. And the reality is that you still need to do all the other things that, like this big base building that everyone needs to be able to breathe and, you know, do all the things that you need to in an endurance sport like this, or whatever you want to call
General
it.
fitness development.
It sounds like you're actually approaching this from two perspectives. The first is an analysis of the sport. What are the demands of the sport? What does that look like? So that's the statistical analysis. How frequent does a movement show up? What are the time domains? Those types of things. And then you're also doing an analysis of the athlete, or if you're an athlete just getting in the sport, an analysis of yourself. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What movements are the biggest issue for you? Are there certain time domains that are weak so that you should spend time doing endurance training for those, or, you know, strength and power training if you're not strong enough for the sport? So it sounds like you're actually doing two separate analyses of, you know, the sport and the athlete. Right. Is that essentially the way you're looking at it?
If you have an athlete, then you kind of do those things together. Like you still are doing those, but then I know that athlete and I know exactly what their goals and targets are. You know, Max's question obviously is a little bit more complicated because this is a broad, like if we have, 500 people that all are listening to the podcast and they say, well, I want to know where to start. Well, I don't know all the, their movement economy, where they're actually at and all those things. So I think to me, the base level is, because they're not going to know enough about maybe the limiter models that we use, and they don't have the ability to like drive all that data, but they can look at what they can and can't do in the sport. And the reality is too, like, it doesn't really matter how good you are on a rower, on a bike erg, or if you did a Moxie test, what your numbers are if you can't do a muscle up. Like I'm that's just the truth in this sport, right? Like if you want to go on a bike and ride bikes, then you go do that. But if you can't do chest to bars and muscle ups fast, if you can't do pistols fast, if you can't do double unders fast, then you can't be good at this sport. So
I like that quote. If you want to be good at riding a bike, then go ride a bike.
I just think that I have a lot of questions, and this is like what you guys have done with the limiter model that we use is fantastic. But people start thinking about, well, they ask me, and I'm sure you've had this question before, what are we training here? If they're doing something where it's trying to improve their muscle ups. And it's like, I'm not trying to improve your cardiac system right now. I'm trying to get you muscle ups, because if you can't do muscle ups, then it doesn't matter how good your cardiac system is. I think
not only that, it shows a more fundamental misunderstanding of what limiter training is itself. Limiter training looks at your holes relative to the sport.
Yes.
Right. It doesn't just encompass physiology or just encompass strength. If you can't do a muscle up, your limiter is your muscle up.
Right.
Like that's it. That's where it comes down to. And I think that's one of the big misunderstandings that people have is like, okay, I'm getting into the sport. I'm hiring a coach. They're going to run an assessment on me. But most of the time for most athletes in the sport, that assessment is just going to look at like, what can you not do that you're going to have to be able to do in the sport?
Yeah. And I think each coach, like the concept of training think tank is a bunch of different coaches coming together and developing processes and procedures for helping athletes get better. Each coach has a different mental framework with which to analyze. We all share information, but Evan might come at it from a more physiological driven perspective. Brandon might be a little bit more performance and sport and analytics driven. You might be a combination. I'm not sure what I am. Just maybe a combination of all of those as well.
Do you even coach anymore? No, I'm kidding.
Damn it. So I think that what you're trying to get at is people are taking like something that Evan might be talking about, which is a physiological limitation, and looking at the internal systems that drive cardiac physiology and respiratory physiology. And they think if I improve those limiters, I get better at a sport, which is a faulty conclusion.
Right.
You got to really understand and do analysis of yourself. What do I need to do to get better at the sport? And then work back to
and
find
it can
out.
go both ways. Don't get me wrong.
sure.
There are people that come
Yeah.
in that have all the skills, but then they need some of that. So that's not me saying that one way is right or wrong. I think we probably should be more like Kyle in that we're trying to grab from both sides and really come up with a game plan.
Don't say that.
I'll give you a hug afterwards.
Come here, Brandon.
But in my mind, because I am so biased from watching other sports, being a part of other sports, seeing the data that's driven other sports, most of us don't have the time in the day to really focus on all of these things. So we do need a coach to kind of guide the process of these are the things that are holding you back. I'm just looking at like those limiters. And sometimes it really is your muscle up technique is poor. And so that's why you're always doing bad muscle up workouts. It's not your respiration, right? Or whatever it may be. It's just a simple example.
We have a question from
Chris
the
has a
audience,
question.
please. Yes.
Here's a question.
I'll take your question.
What is, with all the people in the design and everyone you've coached, what's the average one thing that is most often overlooked or would need focus?
So I'm going to repeat the question because they probably didn't pick that up. So what is, from all the people in the design, all the people we've coached individually, all the people we've worked with in the sport of CrossFit, what's the number one thing that they probably need to work with? The average, the most common thing that they need to work on.
Can we say it at the same time and see, because I don't know what you're going to say. You probably know what I say because I say it all the time. I want to see how different we are.
1, 2, 3,
Strength.
Movement.
To strength, technique, and movement were
Which
the
technique
three
and-
answers.
Technique and movement, but
same
strength
thing.
also basically ties into
and
that.
I think they tie together because if I look at somebody's squat snatch or even back squat and their numbers low, most of the time I'm analyzing that. I'm like, you're leaving 30 or 40 pounds on the table because you are not precise enough in the way that you actually try to do that lift.
For sure.
But yeah, I do think that the majority of people that I coach or coached in the past that maybe weren't at an elite level, they just don't have the weights have been set at a certain threshold and you have to be able to do those, or the gymnastics for females, like you need to be able to press your body weight overhead doing handstand push-ups. The requisite strength levels are just really high. So they have to work on the technique of those strength lifts and build that strength to be able to do the movements.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I mean, I think they all tie in together, like you're saying. The big thing that it's just because it is a pain style sport. I think everyone always thinks I need to still do the CrossFit and go hard all the time, but then they are always kind of limiting their ability to get stronger. When in reality now, in at least one open workout and sometimes 2 or 3, there are heavier barbells that is what's holding people back. And especially now at the sanctional level.
So we've talked a lot about the training or performance training specifically, and kind of circling back to Chris's question. One thing that I see with very beginner competitors or people that are just getting into it or just getting into classes is once they make the switch in their head that they're like, I want to take this a little bit more seriously as a competitor, oftentimes they actually aren't good at competing. Which I mean, like you get into an event, there's a bunch of people around, there's noises, there's a set start time, there's potentially judges and no reps, there's lanes, there's movement, there's new environment, there's new lighting, the sound's extra loud. All of that stuff actually changes the way that people approach the workout. And I feel like good competitors are able to be in those environments and just either stick to their plan or step up to the occasion and actually perform better. And I think that getting comfortable with the anxiety and the self-talk before a workout, like what do you say about yourself when you're feeling that? Are you like, oh man, my stomach hurts. I'm so anxious. This doesn't feel good. My head hurts. I'm not ready to go yet. And you're saying all of that stuff, you're probably going to perform poorly. So there is also like a mental side of this game that is completely separate from the analytical talk that we've been going through.
It is separate, but I would also categorize that as performance training. I put both of those pieces, the things that Brandon just talked about, like analyzing the sport and training people specifically for the sport, not what you think the sport is, but objectively what the sport is, and exposing people, whether in a training environment or from, just getting them into competitions and things like that, but exposing them to a competitive environment. That right there is performance training in a nutshell. You just captured everything that I think of when I think of performance training.
I love the quote. I don't know who said it, a former Navy SEAL in one of his books, but he said, under pressure, you don't rise to the occasion, you lower to the amount of your training or something like that. But the idea would be that you have to prepare for that. Now, I agree with you 100% that there is a psychological component, and some people are just, for lack of a better term, killers when they're out there on the floor or on the field or in the court or in a swimming pool, and that just get it done. But part of that is that they're just preparing a little bit better, and they know what they're actually preparing for. So this actually goes to what I always mean by separation value. So we talk about that and how we separate in training, but then also we need to start looking at workouts. So I think this is kind of where we can take this conversation is when I get a workout. So I get the throwdown workout, and I know it is this past week's. Well,
let's do 10 rounds for time, 10 thrusters at 115 or 80, and 5 bar muscle ups.
So I was going to
15-minute cap. That's TTT TD 5'8".
I was gonna start saying that, and then I stopped because it's like, wait, I don't know when this podcast is coming out.
We had the best demos of all time in that workout.
Yeah. So, Mia was the best demo, and then some other guy.
I'll be second.
Some weirdo.
I did it.
Yeah. When we start looking at those workouts, then we need to start thinking about what is the biggest separator in this workout in general. Like, where is the most time spent for most people? And then also,
so real quick, can you give me an example of what that would look like?
Yeah. Well, let's say that workout specifically. So 10 thrusters is going to take, if you do it unbroken, how long? 20 seconds?
I would say 15 seconds.
15
it's 1.5
seconds.
second per rep. Yeah.
And then 5 muscle ups is 3 seconds a rep?
Is probably 2.5 seconds for the best males and females. Yeah.
Okay. So you're looking at 12 and a half seconds?
Yeah.
Okay.
So when we're looking at something like this, obviously you're talking about a high skill demand. So it's a little bit more challenging because we go back to, well, do you have muscle ups or not? And that's going to be a big limiter. And then obviously load is also a huge limiter. So if it's a 155 pound thruster versus 115 versus 95 and so on for a male, then that changes the game and how you have to pace. But the first thing that we should look at as coaches or as athletes would be the biggest separation across the board. And then the second one, which we can come back to that in a second, but just so everyone gets the picture, would be what's the biggest separator for me as an athlete. So that's where training comes in, of knowing what I'm good at and what I'm bad at. So in other words, if I'm Noah, I know that my bar muscle ups are never going to fail me in a workout like this. Like, I can just go super fast. But what if it's me, who I could maybe do the first 5 rounds really fast and unbroken, but I know that my threshold right now maybe is 25 muscle ups in a workout in 8 minutes, and I'm going to have to really slow down or something like that. That's when I start looking at it and talking, if I have a coach, with my coach of, okay, what have we done in training? This is what we've done. This is what we tested. Here's how I'm going to break this workout up. So when I'm looking at the first step, the broad separation, typically what it would look like is what's going to take the most time in a workout. So to go to an older example first, because this is an easier way to explain it, I always go back to 19-1 because it's 2 movements, so we can go back and forth. So you got 19 cal row, 19 wall balls, right? They almost take the same time, to believe it or not. 19 wall balls takes like 36 seconds, and 19 cal row for most males was taking like 44 to 48 seconds. So overall,
a little bit biased of rowing, but
right? A little bit, but pretty even. And that's why they, I think, chose those numbers, right? But we know, based on the data that we got after we started breaking everything down, that the row is where most time can be made up or lost based on how fast you're rowing. So the simple example that I could give is, if you're rowing at, if you're a male and you're rowing at 1,000 cals per hour, and I'm going unbroken on my wall balls each round back and forth, or if I'm a male and I'm rowing at 1,400 cals per hour and going unbroken on my wall balls, I'm gaining 20 seconds per round doing 1,400 versus 1,000. In 19 cals, you're gaining 20 seconds. Now, I realize that is a big difference. Kyle said this before in the podcast. He's like, that's a huge difference. Yes.
It's just to illustrate the point.
But
to illustrate the point.
I think your point is that the wall ball, you can't really make faster, right? If you go unbroken on the wall ball and you cycle them as fast as you possibly can, you might get them down to 1.5 seconds per wall ball. So your potential to speed that up is at most a half second per rep, which is not going to add up to that much time over the course of the workout. Plus, you probably can't cycle them that fast. But on the rower, you have all this unlimited potential to go faster, right? There's all this ability to create separation by going faster on the rower.
Yeah.
Is that essentially what you're saying?
Yeah. And so, let's give a different example. So if it's 1,200 versus 14, which is kind of where most of the higher level guys, like that top 500 guy, was fighting between that 12 and 1,400. We know as coaches that should inform us that, hey, on a workout that's as simple as that, then the rowing matters more. And so we need to prepare them to row at higher targets than prepare them to move faster on a wall ball. So like, as long as they're meeting the standard target that I know what a wall ball rep should be, so it's about 1.8 seconds per rep, then I know that they're good there. But if they're rowing at 1200 in every single workout, no matter what the time domain is, it's like, no, we have to learn how to go 1600 in a short workout versus 1200 versus 1400 and start training them there. But as an athlete, if you know, like, I can go back into my kind of my training, my past, and say, oh, I did this EMOM where I was holding 1800 cals or 1800 cals per hour every single minute for 20 cals for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever. I can definitely do it in this workout. The way to do that, though, maybe I have to break my wall balls. So then the separation value would be, I'm going to go 1600 or 1500 on the row to gain my time. And then I'm going to break my wall balls 10, rest 5 seconds, 9. So I'm still taking that rest break that we talked about, movement speed and rest time, right? I'm going to go fast in my wall balls, rest 5 seconds, do my 9, but it's going to allow me to hold 1500 versus 1200. So I'm gaining 16 seconds per round versus the other guy that's going unbroken in 1200 or 1300 on the row. So that's kind of what I mean and not everyone breaks out this simple. So go back.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to go back, because I feel like also it's much easier to do. And this is true for coaches as well. As you see more people do the workout, when you see more elites, you can start to observe, oh, this is where the winners are separating themselves relative to the people that are right behind them. And then this is where that kind of next group of RX athletes and then the next group of intermediates, and you can kind of go through that process. Sometimes we can get it wrong, but if we did do that workout with 10 rounds of 10 thrusters and 5 bar muscle ups, like, what's your initial impression when you look at that? Like, what's the biggest separator for people if they were creating their initial plans? Like, all right, where am I going to really try to capitalize on this workout?
So the biggest separator with that is always the high skill movement, right? So right off the bat, can you do 5 bar muscle ups unbroken every single round? And then what's the rest time that's needed to be able to do 5 unbroken? Most people that do this workout next week, whenever, I don't know when this podcast is coming out, but when that workout comes out, right? Most people are going to have to break. But we do know, like someone on site, Travis, he's going to be able to go unbroken, and Noah. So these top guys and girls are going to be able to go fast. So that's a different discussion for them. Yeah. But then it's, okay, so what's the best strategy for me to be able to get 5 done each round with the minimal amount of rest time that I can take, right? So for example, Mia did the workout and she said, I'm going to do my 10 thrusters unbroken for a couple of rounds and then I'm going to start breaking them. But no matter what, I'm going to take a 20-second rest break and try to do bigger sets of muscle ups. And she said before, it's funny because she came up to me before the workout and she said, you're going to hate my strategy because I'm going to take this long rest break. And I told her, I'm like, look, I've always said there's no such thing as over pacing. There's only over resting. So if you need 20 seconds, if that's the minimal amount of time, perfect. You're doing it the right way. My discussion on separation value is always finding the thing that you can crush and then also resting the minimal amount of time to be able to do the work that's needed, right? So for her, after watching, I think she probably should have broke it up a little bit differently, but she still did an excellent job with kind of the rest time she had. But the way that you can look at this workout is if I take 20 seconds every single round to do my 5 muscle ups, but then I still am breaking them up and it ends up being 35-second breaks or, maybe 20, and then I'm breaking them 3-2, and then it's another 15-second break. At the end of it, I need to go back, do my video review, which is why I think it's huge in the open to do your first test, video review, come up with a game plan, and then say, it was taking me on average 28 seconds to do my 5 muscle ups as far as rest time goes. How can I break that down? So maybe for her, it's 10 unbroken thrusters, a 12-second break, 3, 12-second break, 2, every single round, because then she averages 24 seconds of rest time every single round instead of averaging 34 seconds. That's 10 seconds per round. That's 100 seconds. Obviously, it's almost 2 minutes of work time.
Yeah.
Would that have beat Max?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have.
I mean, they were neck and neck. So
hold on, wait. I won. Let's not take away the victory.
I'm going to have her repeat it on Monday.
Yeah, she already said she wanted to repeat it.
She actually said she was going to ask you if she could do it.
One of the values I found of thinking like this, recording your workouts, going back, is that you can actually draw on your past training. So if you see a workout like that, and you're like, all right, well, this is 100 thrusters at 115 and 50 muscle ups. The time cap is 15 minutes. Is there anything in my training? Have I done 30 bar muscle ups for time? Have I done a thruster bar muscle up workout? Have I done a power snatch bar muscle up workout to try to give you some sort of a perspective of what your density capabilities are? Or you can rely on instinct and go into it and say, okay, I'm going to do my first couple of rounds at this. And then based on how things feel, I'm going to try to navigate the workout, which is Travis's strategy. Sure. And generally that's pretty damn good of an execution on the first time. But then when he goes back, then he goes through a more technical analysis of figuring out where he rested and cutting out rest time for the second time through. But I think thinking about it, reporting your results on a regular basis gives you the kind of that leg up to be a little bit more of an executor on your first run in a workout, or better at analyzing a workout to find, okay, what's the separation value going to be? Because on that workout, it's pretty straightforward for most people. Like if you're really light and you're really good at gymnastics, but 115 pounds is a heavy thruster, then your separation is actually in a different spot than the aggregate amount of people.
Yeah. So then that's the thing that you got to look at. The broad picture is most likely going to be the muscle ups. And so when we're talking about broad separation, it is still that for that person. They have to attack the muscle ups. If I'm 115 pounds, and I know I can go unbroken and fast, I'm telling my athlete, as soon as you finish your 10th thruster every single round, go and do it unbroken as fast as possible, get back to the bar, and then take your break, right? The reality is they may still lose time on the bar, but you have to attack the broad separation. Then you have the personal separation. Where am I gaining or losing time? And this is kind of the other data point that I like to use in workouts is that's what I'm looking at is based on all the people, your peers that you're going against, where are you losing time? Where are you gaining time in the workout? And then that's what as coaches informs us on how to train them. So if a guy's weak and he can do 5-bar muscle ups, then we have to work on his squat endurance or strength, whatever it may be. And that's going to be a process, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you touched on there is just the fact that when you have an athlete who, so like imagine this scenario, you have an athlete and they don't have access to the data that we've got. They don't have access to elite scores. They don't have access to other people's strategies. What's the best way for them to approach getting into a workout? Is it to take the Travis strategy and rely on their intuition the first time, then analyze the workout and, use what they learned from the first time and go and attack it? Or is it to just try and create as detailed of a strategy map as they can the first time and then upgrade that for their repeat? What's the best way to approach it?
Yeah, I would say never just jump into workouts, especially if you're new. I think it's probably good to have strategy. Now, with that said, I think the way, just to go back to Travis real quick, he's still pulling from his memory bank. Like he never does a workout and just says, he says he's going for it, but you can see him as he's working through workouts. He knows this is how many reps I can do it. He did a workout today with 205-pound front squats. He knew exactly how many he was going to do when he cleaned the bar, and he did them really, really fast. He put it down. He took a couple breaths, did his next set. So it's like, his brain's still working. It's just he's done it for so long that he knows exactly where he's at. And that's also why he's so good. But like you said, in the open workouts, he's pulling it back and he's saying, okay, here's the review after his first attempt. And that's why he always crushes his second attempt.
Yeah. I mean, if his strategy ability, and maybe that is, I'm going to say this, it's not shitting on Travis. He's a close friend and a great athlete, but he always needs his almost always needs his repeats in an open format. Whereas somebody like Noah will do the workout, he'll repeat it, but he'll very rarely make a huge change in his overall performance. And a lot of that, I think, is the upfront intellectual work that goes into trying to break it down, going in on Thursday, doing some reps, timing it out, watching somebody go and coming up with some sort of a target to go into the workout. So I do think that there is something that he could potentially do to execute better on those first runs that would be some sort of a strategy breakdown. But he is not, I mean, I think it's almost a game for him at this point. Like he likes to say, I don't strategize, but he, there's always some intuitive strategy that anybody at that level is going through.
On the other hand, though, isn't Travis's strategy making him potentially better at executing a workout right when it's announced? So Travis, who is a games athlete, now keep in mind, Travis is going to go compete at games and sanctionals where events are announced sometimes
right away,
minutes before they go out to execute them. That's a great strategy for learning how to execute an unknowable event. So on one hand, you could say, man, that's a great strategy. On the other hand, if you're trying to maximize your performance in that workout, in the moment, in the open, it's probably not the optimal strategy.
Yeah. And we are talking about mostly open athletes with a lot of the data that you're going through.
The cool thing is though, too, is we can extrapolate that out to, we have all the sanctional data. We know how often things were tested, how many reps. And so we also do that with our high level athletes. They're doing that. To go back to your question real quick, Kyle, I do think there's almost a point of you have to let someone go out and kind of take risks though. So like you ask the person that has no idea, they don't have any of this data and they just want to go and do 10 rounds of 10 thrusters and 5-bar muscle ups. The one challenge that I have found is that some people get overly analytical and then they go slow in every workout.
Yep.
And I'm sure that there are all kinds of ways that maybe as coaches, we can kind of start still developing those people. It's been a challenge for me because I am overly analytical, but I still am willing to, like, I'm going to push myself in workouts because I want to win. So I think there's a balance between, you got to be analytical and think about where your strengths and weaknesses are, but you also have to have that instinct of like, no, I just have to go the last 2 rounds because I want to beat Max is kind of next to me, maybe in a workout.
Does that strategy bear out for people? So when you have them, when you have people plan out workouts, because I do know that you're very analytical. I mean, I've done the open, pre-open shows with you many times, and you have a strategy. As soon as the workout is announced, you have a really well formulated strategy for high level competitors. When you have those discussions with athletes, how much are you letting them create the input? How much are you dictating? Like, where does the athlete's agency fall in that line?
Yeah, I think that every athlete should come up with their own strategies, and the coach is basically the guardrails on the highway, so to speak. So I always tell my athletes, come up with your strategy and send it to me. I will review it and then help guide the process. But especially when you know that they're going to do a repeat, I almost think unless it's like really off, almost always better to let them come up with a strategy and attack it as best as they can and then do that video review. Because most of the athletes that are doing the open, unless it's a very high level competitor that's actually trying to get top 20 now with the new structure, they're just trying to get their best score. But they also, training is a process for them and they're just trying to continually improve. And so part of that is educating them in building their own memory bank of, I remember last year in 16.2 versus 19.2. I remember doing 16.2 and this is how I failed. So this year in 19.2, it's 3 years later, I've gotten better at squat, cleans, and toes to bar. I'm going to do this, this, and this. It allows them to start thinking about it and they're not just like using the coach as a crutch.
Well, not only that, but one of the big problems is spending time planning out a workout, but then not analyzing it afterwards. So like if you just plan out your strategy for a workout, you do it and you just leave it there. Where's the learning in that? How do you learn what mistakes you made? How do you learn how to like actually improve from there?
I believe that was a rhetorical question, but we actually have a real question from the audience.
And my real question actually plays into that. To me, it seems like on a big picture level, this all starts with awareness of your own performance. And it seems like getting people to do video review or to remember their actual data,
training logs
and stuff like that. Where's the pushback that people won't do this and they're not catching up to that?
So Chris's question was that it seems like all of what we talked about begins with awareness, self-awareness about yourself as an athlete. So going through a video review process, understanding the sport that you're participating in, keeping training logs of what you do on a regular basis, which I all agree with. And then he said, if that's the case, why is there pushback, or where's the pushback with regards to doing that?
Yeah, I think the first, it kind of goes back to the original thing that we were talking about. Like most people, when they get into the sport, it is because you think about all our first workouts, right? I guarantee, I've heard your stories before, but it's like some painful workout and you're like, what is this? I love it, right?
Fight Gone Bad.
Right, yeah. Fight Gone Bad. What was it?
Fran.
I did Fran, same thing.
What a bad choice.
Yeah. And you're just like, the pain was so awesome. It's just like, because we're all just
awesome.
Masochists.
It was humbling.
Yeah, humbling. I never want to experience that again. I didn't realize where it would lead.
I think that we get a lot of those types of people that come into the sport. And so then they always think it's just about training harder that's going to get me better. And to some degree, that's probably true. Like you need to be a little bit tough or like be able to grind a little bit. But part of training education or coaching education for our athletes is there's so much more to it. And that's the whole point of a podcast like this, is thinking outside of training. How can we take some of the data and some of the feels that are the sport to get us better at performing in the sport?
I'm going to go and answer. Can I answer your question and then ask?
Well, let me add this.
Okay.
It seems like everybody's real quick to film an Instagram video, but they won't do a video.
Yeah, everybody's real quick to film an Instagram video, but very hesitant to video review a workout.
That should be our quote on all of our stuff now.
Well, I mean, it kind of goes into the Ronnie Coleman quote, like everybody wants to be strong, but nobody wants to lift these heavy ass weights.
So true.
I was honestly going to say, I think it circles back to laziness. And I don't want to be judgmental because I've been in a position where like the mental energy of doing something or watching myself, that's just a painful process sometimes. But if you really look at people that want to achieve something and they have the desire to do it, there's always a recording process. If you want to be wealthy, then you have to go through an accounting process to figure out where you're spending your money, how much budgeting you have to do on a regular basis. Yeah. Chris is over there holding up Kobe Bryant's Mamba mentality. And I think it's true. Like if you want to achieve anything, even if you're not trying to be Rich Froning or you're not trying to be Matt Frazier, the approach that you take in a sport should be to, if you're doing it, like I'm doing this sport, I want to be as good as I could possibly can with this amount of time that I'm dedicating to it. It's silly not to review your technique and look over what you do on a regular basis and keep training results so you can go back, because you're literally just doing something half-assed and giving away free performance. So I truly believe that it's just conditioning your behavior to do things that are a little bit more uncomfortable with your time. Instead of watching funny videos on TikTok or whatever, you're doing things that are actually productive to your training goals.
I was going to disagree with you until your very last sentence about TikTok, but
now that you said TikTok.
No, yes, that. No, I was going to disagree with you and say it was habit related, that people aren't in the habit of recording their videos and they're not in the habit of keeping those training logs. I'm in the process of reading Atomic Habits, and it's a great book. And it's definitely made me think about it. But I think part of the problem for them is they haven't, like, to steal his words, engineered their environment to be able to make that possible. Like, why I started thinking, why don't I record my training logs? Like I put my training log in every single day for Adam. However, I rarely ever film a workout. Why? Because my phone's full of videos. Like my phone storage is almost always full. Video of my kids, videos of workouts from last year, the Masters qualifiers, the things I had to record. So if I think about it, like I need to make it simpler for myself to actually do that. So maybe I take my old phone, clear off the storage, and I use that to record my videos every time, or I bring my GoPro, just like engineering my environment to be much easier for me to record my videos and review my videos. I think that is probably one of the bigger issues that people have, is they just have these like little tiny hurdles, and it's enough of a hurdle that they just don't do it. Yeah,
that's a much less judgmental way to put it, and I agree with that. But there's also some of it where it's just like, run through the fucking hurdles. Like anything that comes in your way, if it's important enough, through them, over them, around them, find people that can lift you up over them. Like just do whatever you have to do. And I think some of that it really is just conditioning your behaviors and not taking the lazy route around it.
And awareness. Like before we had this conversation, I hadn't even thought that it was something that I should be doing on a consistent basis, even though I encourage my athletes to do it. It's like the mirror got turned on me, and it's like, okay, well now this is something I'm going to do on a daily basis. So I'm going to challenge people listening to the podcast as well. So I'm going to do it. I'm going to walk the walk. You guys walk the walk.
Yeah, I think part of it is self-assessment. Like you got to go back every couple of weeks or months or whatever it may be and kind of assess, what are my priorities? What are my goals in this sport or anything else that we're doing? And it takes me back to the whole golf thing. Max and I have been playing a little bit more, and it's something that I want to get good at. And so now I'm trying to take the same approach with the minimal amount of time that I have, though, to improve on that. And I'm stealing a lot of these ideas. I'm taking all my stats, the data that I get from, different, strokes gain and strokes loss metrics that they use in the PGA Tour. And then also like the time spent reviewing how I swing and all those things. It's like, that's an easy way without having to go and take, 100 balls and hit them at the range and time away from family. Just go and do that on my phone and kind of check things out. And we can do that in this sport as well.
All right. Well, we've been talking. Oh, do we have another question from the audience? Final question. Yes.
I'm going to zoom in here.
Oh, you're on Brandon. Oh, he's zooming in on Brandon's face.
Just so you know, you're on.
Brandon, turn back to the side.
Don't look at the camera. This is a better angle.
Is that a booger? Is there a booger over there?
It might be. I don't know.
Just do a little wiggle. No, not on your face.
Boogers come from your nose.
I don't know. Can you look?
Sir, you said you had a question. Please ask it.
That was it.
Oh, that was it.
I
didn't answer the question.
So we have some information and education on these concepts. You just did a series on limiter bridge performance, and that covers performance training. So that is out. We have a YouTube video on limiter bridge performance. So Brandon and Becky collected all of this data, and I created a one-off article. I think I used 19.3 as an example in the classroom as how to use data to analyze yourself in the sport. There's also like organizations like Beyond the Whiteboard, and I think CrossFit Analytics was an Instagram page. I don't know if it's still around, but they had some good information on statistics, the open leaderboard. Like there's so much information out there that you could use to kind of upgrade your awareness of the sport, like Chris talked about. Anything else you guys want to add?
Nope. I appreciate Brandon coming on the podcast.
Thank you, guys.
Brandon, thank you very much.
I appreciate it. It's hot in here.
Yeah. And also I did stop sweating as we were going through this, and
I was
said
watching
it would be
you.
impossible.
Well, no, the side of your head is still sweaty.
Is it?
Is it?
Damn,
Why is one side of his head still sweating?
It's not. He's just trying to put me down.
While he was talking at one point, I was just staring at your skull. I was like, wow.
I'm going to go train and film it.
Awesome.
I love it.